Hello, criminal justice majors. Welcome to the So You Want to Go to Law School workshop. My name is Mimi Glumac. I am an attorney and also a lecturer faculty in the criminal justice department, and I will be your host for today's workshop. So welcome to everyone. Those of you, some of you know me, the rest of you who don't know me very well, you can read a little bit about me on the bio page under criminal justice. But I spent a good deal of my career as an attorney practicing in private practice and also working for the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals as a staff attorney. But before I got to all of those wonderful places and before I ended up here where I love being as a teacher, I had to figure out how to get into and get through law school. So today's workshop is going to be my effort to introduce you to everything that you need to know about law school, about getting into law school, the process, some straight talk and some honest answers to questions that you might have. So I'm going to go ahead and get my screen share started over here and we'll get into the presentation. All right, here we go. So again, you think you want to go to law school. Again, it's a question that a lot of people have and they're not quite sure where to start or what to do. So like I said, today is going to be an effort to get you guys oriented as to what needs to happen, what the process is like, and what kind of information do you need, the cost, etc. Now, what can you do with a law degree? You can do many, many things. You can actually practice law in many different fields, such as advertising or maritime law, or you can become an appellate lawyer that specializes only in taking cases up on appeal. You can work in criminal law as a prosecutor or even as a private defense attorney or a public defender. You could handle immigration law or intellectual property law. You could work as a judicial clerk or a labor lawyer or a law clerk like I did at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. You could even be a politician. You could go into politics. Most politicians are lawyers. You could teach like I am. So there's a myriad, of opportunities that can be achieved and be available in terms of professional choices once you have a law degree. And there's many reasons that you may want to go to law school, such as you're interested in legal, justice, economic, or social issues. You may excel at logical thinking. You might be that one person around, the Thanksgiving dinner table who's always able to solve a thorny question or a riddle or something like that. You enjoy learning from and communicating with others. But a piece of advice that you will see over and over again, and one which I will emphasize with you, is that you absolutely should be sure that it's the right decision before you undertake law school. So everybody comes to me and asks, what is the process? What's the process? And when should I begin the process of applying to law school? So I'm going to try to give you a little bit of guidance with regard to that. In fact, I'm going to give you an actual schedule that you can follow very clearly. So the first step of when to begin the process of applying law school should begin about 10 months before you intend to submit your applications to law school. And I said 10 months before you intend to submit your applications to law school, not before you intend to go to law school. So 10 months before you intend to submit your applications to law school, which are usually submitted in the fall, a year before you go to law school. All right. So, for example, if you wish to go to law school in fall of 2023, you should begin the process in approximately January of 2022. And a lot of students say, well, Professor, why do we have to start so soon? Because planning is the key to a successful application process. You have a lot of information to gather. You have to get your transcripts together. You have to take tests. You have to think about letters of recommendation. You have to get your financial documents in order. And again, you have to study for and take required tests like the LSAT, which require preparation, planning, practice, tutoring, registration, etc. You also need to sign up for a credential assembly service by using certain organizations which actually provide such a service, because you're going to be using that for your law school applications. Similarly, there's deadlines that have to be met. Deadlines for applying to take tests. deadlines for uploading certain information, deadlines for applying for law school, deadlines for applying for financial aid. So allowing yourself an ample amount of lead time is going to ensure a smooth process and avoid any unnecessary stress, because the process is itself stressful. So whatever you can do to get ahead of that stress is highly recommended. Now, let's go through these steps. I have 10, and we'll go through them here in a list, and then I will dive into each one of them a bit more deeply shortly. Okay, I'm just going to close my thumbnail for a moment so you can see that, just in case it's obscuring it. Number 1 on the list is meet with a pre-law advisor as soon as possible. And I mean ASAP, which is in the, right now, wherever you are in the year before you start, or year you submit your applications, or in the January of the year that you are going to apply at the latest, okay? So make sure that's the first thing that you get done. Second, create your lsac.org account online. This should happen in January of your junior year, all right? So that 10 months before you start applying to law schools is about January of your junior year. So create your lsac.org account online. Next, begin preparing for the LSAT. So in January through March of your junior year, you should start preparing for the LSAT, and we'll talk about that shortly. The LSAT is offered about 6 to 9 times per year, so you need to be strategic about planning for when you are going to take it and preparing accordingly. Next, you want to start researching law schools through January and March of your junior year. Next, you want to register to take the LSAT, so that should be about April of your junior year. 6 on the list, you want to register for the Credential Assembly Service through your lsac.org account, which you set up way back in January. So in May of your junior year, you should be registering for the Credential Assembly Service. Number 7, you're now going to take the LSAT in June or July before your senior year. And we'll talk about why we time it this way and what are the advantages of taking it in June or July before your senior year. Number 8, you want to then begin narrowing down the schools that you want to apply to after you've taken your LSAT and get your score. That's going to be August of your senior year. 9, you want to gather and upload the necessary materials for your applications, and that should happen in September of your senior year. And then finally, number 10, you begin the application process of applying to law schools. So in October through December of your senior year is when you're going to be submitting your applications to law school, even if the deadlines for the schools are later. And we'll talk about why in just a moment. So first thing that I've recommended is in January of the year that you are going to submit your application. So about 10 months before you submit your applications, you should meet with your pre-law advisor as soon as you can. That would be me in the Criminal Justice Department or Professor Jeff Snipes. And I'll remind you of this again at the end of the presentation. But meet with your pre-law advisor as soon as possible. It's never too early to start talking with a pre-law advisor. We can help you with your trajectory. We can help answer questions. We can help make sure that you are on schedule and you are doing everything that needs to be done in a timely and effective manner. So it's never too early to meet with us or with one of your grad school advisors if you have somebody that you can meet with in a different department if you are only a CJ minor and you are actually a major in a different department. We can offer valuable information and assistance throughout the law school admissions process. So meet with a pre-law advisor as soon as possible. Next is January of the year that you plan to submit your applications. So about 10 months before you submit your applications, you want to create your lsac.org account online. I have links that are going to be provided along with this video on the criminal justice website, so you'll be able to look it up, but you can just type in lsac.org and start setting up your account. You will be using this account over the next 10 months for everything. You will be registering for your LSAT through this account. You will be uploading your transcripts. You will be sending out requests and submitting letters of recommendation through this account. You'll be preparing and submitting your applications through this particular account. So the sooner you set it up, the better, because you will be using it for everything that is related to your application process over the next 10 months. All right, so now we're in March, about 8 months before you start submitting your applications. What do you do in March? This is when you begin preparing for the LSAT, okay? The LSAT is the law school admissions test, and it's a standardized test. Everyone who goes to law school must take the LSAT. Now, the LSAT is going to be an essential part of your application materials. Your LSAT score is critical, but everyone who wants to go to law school has to take it. However, it's different than any other test that you've ever taken, and it requires preparation. What do I mean by different? It has the kinds of questions you've never seen before, like logic games or logical reasoning questions. It includes reading comprehension testing, experimental section, a writing sample. So these are different in kind and in form from any other kinds of questions you've ever seen on undergraduate exams. Not only are they different and are going to be new, but they require a lot of skill in order to take this exam successfully. Skill comes with practice. It comes with a lot of practice, because not only is the substance of the test different and the type of skills that it's testing different than what you're usually accustomed to in undergraduate classes, but it's also going to be done under very, very high pressure timed situation. So the timing is going to be key. So you need to keep practicing and practicing. So my rule of thumb is that you set aside at least 3 months to study for the LSAT. Now, what are some of the common approaches to studying for the LSAT? Some people take a timed practice test. And whenever you see an asterisk available, on the slides that I'm showing to you, I have a little footnote that this references a link that's going to be available on the I put political science website, but what I meant to say is the criminal justice website. It should be available under the student resources tab. So the links are going to be available on the criminal justice website, and I will hopefully have that information for you at some point. So we'll send out an email as to where you can find them. But whenever you see an asterisk, that means that there is going to be, usually accompanying this video, a link to one of these sources, okay? Next, some people order additional sample exams. The best way to prepare and to know where your weaknesses are or your strengths are is to take some of these timed practice exams or take some more sample exams to see what your problem areas are, what you're good at, and where you need to focus your studies. Additionally, people order LSAT prep books. There's a whole variety of options out there for you to choose from. Each of them are a bit different, but most of them include the same material, which is sample questions and strategies for how you approach and try to solve each type of question. Now, if you can afford it, and this is by no means required, but if you can afford it financially, I highly recommend that you enroll in an LSAT prep course or that you hire a tutor. Now, it's not required, but again, if you can afford it, I highly recommend that you do so. So that's how you start prepping for the LSAT. Now, in January through March, which is, between 10 and 8 months before you submit your applications, you're going to start researching law school. So again, in March, at the latest of your junior year, you should have begun the process of researching law schools. Ask yourself, where do you want to go to law school? Geographically, do you want to stay in state or do you want to go to out of state? Do you want to go to a public school or a private school? Do you want to stay on the West Coast? Do you want to go somewhere else in the country? Think about it from a geographical perspective, as well as a financial perspective, and also whether or not you have your heart set on attending a certain kind of institution that's associated with a high level of research or a high level of, service in particular areas of the law that you're interested in. Next thing is visit the law school websites to gather basic information. What do I mean by this? I mean, go to the websites and get the basic information that you need about the school, such as admission requirements, application deadlines, tuition, student life, etc. Get what you need to answer some of your most basic questions. Also, do your homework. Go to some, virtual open houses. Avail yourself of whatever video material they have online. Reach out and connect with existing students, which is a service that some of law schools will provide, where you can connect with existing students who are sort of like the ambassadors, and you can ask them direct questions. So do your homework. Don't just go to the website and do the basics. Do a deep dive and inform yourself in any way that you can. And finally, start talking to people who went to law school, like me, like Professor Snipes. We have other professors in the criminal justice department or the political science department who are lawyers. Talk to people in your family that you know that went to law school, or ask them if they can put you in touch with a friend that they have. Talk to friends, relatives, family members, anybody who's willing to chat with you about what it was like to go to law school and where they went to law school and what they liked about the law school that they ended up going to. All right, now, about 7 months before you submit your applications is when you should register to take the LSAT. So in about April of your junior year, you should use your lsac.org account that you signed up for back in April to register to take the actual exam. Now, the LSAT is offered multiple times every year, up to 9 times a year, depending on the year, and at various testing sites throughout the country. The deadline to register is about a month before the test date. However, space is limited. So even though the deadline to register is a month before the test date, that doesn't mean that certain testing offerings, like in certain locations, won't fill up right away. So I highly, highly, highly recommend that, because there is only a certain number of testing sites and dates offered throughout a year at any given time, make sure that you sign up as early as possible, because the testing center that's closest to you could fill up really early. So you want to make sure that you get in and get a space close to home or close to where you're living, because it'll take that one less thing off of your worry list. You know, you don't want to have to spend a lot of time traveling a long distance to take the exam and worry about, you know, gosh, like accidents on the road or traffic jams. You know, I mean, taking the LSAT is already stressful. So make sure you get registered April of your junior year. Think about when you want to take it and where you want to take it, and make sure that you register early so that you get the space and the location of your choice. All right, so that's about 7 months before you submit your applications. Now, in May, about 6 months before you submit your applications, you're going to register for the Credential Assembly Service. So that's like in May of your junior year. Now, the Credential Assembly Service, or the CAS, is what we call a gatekeeper between you and the law schools. This is where you are going to submit all of your application materials, your letters of recommendation, your what do you call it? Your transcripts. Everything is going to go here. Your LSAT scores, and not only is this going to collect all of the and assemble all of the credentials, but it's going to verify and then submit these directly to each law school when you submit your applications. So most ABA, which is the American Bar Association approved law schools, require that applicants use the CAS because of the verification process. So make sure that you register for the Credential Assembly Service via your lsac.org account. Now, the fee to use the Credential Assembly Service is $195, but don't be put off, because there are fee waivers available for certain qualified applicants. And like I said, most ABA approved schools, which is where I encourage you to apply, are going to require that you use this service for your application process. Now, here we are, June or July. It's finally time to take the LSAT. Okay, so 4 or 5 months before you begin submitting your applications to law schools, so June or July, between your junior and your senior year, you need to take the LSAT. All right. People say, you know, why do we take it in June or July? Well, because you can get it off of your list of things to do before you go into your senior year. You will have your LSAT scores ready to submit with your applications. You know where you stand. And because it'll give you time to prepare. Okay, it'll give you that 3 months when you're out of school to prepare to take the exam, or at least, you know, it'll give you a good solid 2.5 months of preparation when you're not actively in school. Now, For those of you who might be taking the LSAT coming up soon, I included a little, short list of tips here for you. So tips for the day of the exam, ladies and gents and everyone. Make sure you know what you need to bring on the test day. Not just bring your best skills and your best self, but what do you need to bring? An ID, a registration card, photo ID, all those things. Make sure that they're ready to go and by your door or in your bag, whatever you're bringing with you that day so that you're ready on the test day. I think it goes without saying, go to bed early so you get a good night's sleep. This is not the night to stay up cramming because you really need your full faculties. And the best way to make sure that you show up well is to make sure you're well rested. I always tell students, watch what you eat. This is not the night before is not the time to find out whether you're allergic to a particular kind of a nut or, overeat or overindulge, dare I say, in, celebratory activities, because you don't want anything, what you drank or what you ate to interfere with your ability to concentrate or feel comfortable while you're taking the exam. Make sure you dress in layers for the exam because many times they're given in large conference rooms or conference areas or large classrooms that can either get cold or hot depending on the temperature situation, especially because they are oftentimes given, sometimes on the weekends in these facilities. So make sure you layer up. It's better to be able to take off a layer and put one back on than to be too hot or too cold. Anything that detracts from your ability to give your full focus to the exam. And last but not least, make sure that you allow plenty of time to get to the test center. Account for getting lost, for traffic accidents, for anything that might deter you from getting there on time. Make sure you allow ample time so that you are less stressed when you arrive and you're not worried about whether or not you're going to miss the start of the exam. Okay, so those are just some tips for those of you who are going to be taking the exam coming up soon. Next, about 3 months before you submit your application is the time for you to narrow down your schools. Now, you're going to be narrowing down your schools in August of your senior year. And the reason that you're going to be doing this in August is because you will have taken the LSAT, according to my calendar here, and you will be able to then review your LSAT scores. Your LSAT scores are going to be available approximately 3 weeks after you take the test. So once you have your scores in hand, you're going to want to compare your score with the average score for the schools that you want to attend. All right. Now, again, I have asterisks that I'm going to place on this next section, but I want you to know that they're available. They'll be available on the criminal justice website, hopefully under student resources, if not in another section, and you can just check in with me as to where to find it. I apologize again for the typo. All right, so compare your scores with the average score for the schools that you want to attend to determine if you want to retake the LSAT. And we'll talk about the wisdom of doing this in just a moment, if in fact it's the right choice for you. But you may want to retake it. You can retake it, but there are some upsides and there's some downsides that we'll address in just a moment. Once you have your LSAT scores in hand, now you can begin narrowing the list of the schools that you want to apply to. All right. Based on your LSAT score and your GPA, you want to start narrowing the schools that you apply to. How do you do this? You do this by using the handy dandy LSAC official guide to ABA approved law schools algorithm, for which I will provide a link that is available with this video. It is going to help you plug in the actual LSAT score you received and your GPA, press enter, and you will get a list of schools where you have a variety and a scale, from good to great to maybe, of schools that you would qualify for based on that school's requirements and for their applicants and for their entrance and for the students that are actually admitted. So instead of just casting about in the dark, I highly recommend that you use the LSAC official guide to ABA approved law schools. It's a great tool where you can plug in some numbers and you can get some great ideas about law schools that maybe you hadn't even thought about. But that will help you narrow down the list of schools that you want to apply to based on what the information you have, your LSAT score and your GPA. Now, I'm going to say a few words about what I consider to be, sort of like Hail Mary passes or moonshots and other application choices. If you have your heart set on a particular school, even if it's a long shot, I say try to apply to at least 2 long shots. Have 2 long shots, have a group of schools in the middle that are pretty good chances of getting in, and then have a couple of schools that are also your sure things. So make sure that you don't limit yourself only to the sure things. You never know. You never know with the long shots. So I say, you know what? Take a chance and apply. It doesn't hurt. All right. So don't be discouraged. Go into it understanding that it's a long shot, and the likelihood of getting into Harvard without a certain LSAT score or a good GPA is probably about the same as winning the lottery. But you never know. You never know, right? So I always say do it just so that you have the experience of doing it and say that you tried. All right. All right. Now, in September of the year that you are applying to law schools, which is about 2 months before you submit your application, you're going to gather and upload the necessary materials for your applications. That's September of your senior year. Most schools require many pieces of information, including your application forms, your application fee, a resume, a personal statement, between 1 and 3 letters of recommendation, undergraduate transcripts, LSAT scores, etc. So most schools require many pieces of information that are going to be required for the application. So make sure that by September, you have gathered and uploaded the necessary materials for your application. Don't forget that in some instances, you need to update that information after you receive your fall semester grades. So in January of your senior year, you want to make sure that for the schools that require it, if you have applied to any of schools that require it, that you submit your updated fall semester grades. I advise students to do it, especially if they've had a stellar semester, because it doesn't hurt, and it can be calculated also in consideration by the schools that require it and the schools that don't necessarily require it. So it doesn't hurt. All right. Now, October. So about a month before you begin submitting your applications, which would usually start in November, December, I don't care what the deadlines say. I want you to begin your process as soon as they're open. So apply to law schools using your credential assembly service and using your lsac.org platform between October and December of your senior year, even if the deadline for a particular school is later. Most law schools start accepting applications between August and October of any given year. And most schools don't stop accepting applications until sometime between February or June. But most law schools have what we call rolling admissions. And rolling admissions means that it's ongoing. So they will continually be admitting students who meet certain criteria. And that criteria may be like that student for whom they make a special accommodation, or they need to say, okay, we need some students who've demonstrated excessive or extraordinary abilities with their LSAT, but maybe their GPA included some work that wasn't so great because of an explanation they've given us in their personal statement. Once that spot's gone, it's gone. So by applying early, you benefit from these rolling admissions because you might be that student that they decide, you know what, we're going to take a chance on this one, even though the GPA isn't great. And ordinarily, that's not a GPA that we would accept from an admitted student. So the sooner you get your applications in, the better chance you have of taking advantage of the rolling admissions. And that benefits those students who get their applications in early. Similarly, it can give you a better idea of where you stand in terms of which schools you've been accepted to or not accepted to. It can help you decide if you want to start expanding and maybe submit a few more applications. So apply between October and December of senior year, even if the deadline is later. So again, October or December of senior year, no matter the deadline. And make sure that you check in with the schools that you've applied to. Make sure that they have all the necessary information, that they've received everything that you've sent. And this is particularly important When you're talking about materials that are coming from third parties, like letters of recommendation or official transcripts, you want to make sure that your credential assembly service has all those materials before you start sending out your applications. But if you were still waiting on one professor or something like that to do a letter of recommendation, check in to make sure that the school actually received it if the letter of recommendation comes in after you've done your application. Okay. So never forget that you need to check in and make sure that you are proactive in ensuring that any school to which you've applied has received all the necessary application and information to consider your application, to consider you for admission. All right. All right. So a lot of students ask me, what do schools look for in your application? So let's talk first about the critical elements. Your LSAT score, which we'll talk about in a moment, and your GPA are critical. Those are two factors which most people say are probably the two most important factors. It's true when I applied to law school, it was true 50 years ago, and it's still true today. Also, we go into a category now of what are some of the important things that law schools look for. The rigor of your undergraduate coursework is important. What kinds of classes did you take? Were they rigorous? Were they demanding? Were they a more refined and advanced subject matter? That's what schools look for. They also look for excellent reading and writing skills. How do they discern whether you have those? In part through your LSAT scores and in part through the material that you've submitted with your applications, such as your personal statement. Having strong letters from people who know you well, which we'll talk about in a moment, are also important. Those that can speak to your academic abilities and who you are as a person, very important. So we have a couple of critical components, a couple of important components that law schools look for. Let's talk about some good components. Extracurricular involvement is good. Did you volunteer? Were you a member of your sorority or fraternity or other organization that demonstrated your interest in community? What did you do while you were in law school that demonstrates an interest beyond just your academics that could potentially translate into what you would want to do in your future career as a lawyer? Anytime you can demonstrate personal growth is great. You want to make sure that if you have experienced a significant amount of personal growth or overcome adversity, you discuss it in your personal statement so they can see who you are as a person and as a person and what kind of growth you've undertaken to get you where you are today. Now, last but not least, is a demonstrated interest in the law school itself. Go to those open houses, the virtual open houses. Reach out to the people in the admissions office. Reach out to students if you're able to connect with students. If you show an interest in going into a particular law school, I'm not saying that's what's going to get you in, but it certainly can't hurt. If you show that you are really, really dedicated to the idea of being able to go to this law school, then, everybody wants to be wanted, right? And even law schools, they want students there who are really, really intent and focused on going to their law school. So never underestimate the power or the possibility that making yourself seen and connecting with people at the law school can be helpful. All right. Now, let's talk about some of the key necessary materials that you need to gather about which most students have questions. First, let's start by talking about letters of recommendation. So again, as I mentioned in the slide earlier, you want to get strong letters from people who know you well. The instructors and professors with whom you've had, at least a couple of classes with, preferably 2 or 3 classes, maybe you TA'd for them. And even if it's only one class, if you were their top student and if you spent time getting to know them and they spent time getting to know you, then even if it's only been one class, it's worth asking for a letter of recommendation. It could also be somebody for whom you have worked, who gives, a sort of slightly different perspective on who you are, but it has to be somebody who knows you well and who can speak to your skills that are going to translate well to your academic undertaking in law school, such as your commitment to, your work, no matter what the task, your dedication to, being a team player, whatever it is. My recommendation is that it's always preferable to get letters of recommendation from your professors, instructors with whom you've had classes. But again, if you did an externship, for a law-based organization, or let's say in a court or something like that, or you did an internship, or you worked in a law firm, by all means, you can reach out to people like that as well. I suggest that you begin requesting these letters of recommendation about 2 to 3 months before you submit your application. So that's like August or September of your senior year, because sometimes it takes a while for the instructors to get them written. But make sure that you always, always, always ask first before sending a request to an instructor or to a person through your lsac.org account, because you can send the request directly to them there through the lsac.org account. They then can write the letter and upload it through the LSAC, and then it's all in one place. But never send it to a professor or to someone from whom you would like to have a letter recommendation unless you have asked them first and you get their consent and agreement to write you that letter. Letters from your parents, letters from your grandparents, letters from your mother, uncles, not so helpful, not so helpful. But from people who know you well in an academic or, like, say, a work type of situation, those are great letters of recommendation. Now, what about the personal statement? The personal statement is something with which a lot of students struggle. So I would say make sure that you plan to write multiple drafts and have it go through multiple revisions. It's a short essay in which you are trying to basically communicate and articulate who you are and why you want to go to law school. And as I mentioned a few slides ago, including a narrative and information about what you've gone through, what you've overcome to get where you are to this place where you are going to, pursue your dream of law school, that information is necessary. It's critical to an understanding of who you are. So don't shy away from including a very, very personal narrative and sharing what it is that you've done, how you've grown personally, so that you can give the admissions council, an idea of who you really are. And then, who you are and why you want to go to law school. What do you want to do with your law degree? What do you want to do? What do you want to teach? Do you want to practice? Do you want to do you want to go out and change the world? And if so, how? And if so, why? So it's really ideal to start early. So I would say no later than August or September of your senior year, because again, you're going to want to write multiple drafts. You're going to probably want maybe a parent or a dear friend or, somebody like even a teacher to help you by looking it over and giving you feedback on how to rewrite it or what's missing or what kinds of revisions you need. But remember, it's the one sort of way that they get to interview you. This is your interview. They don't do in-person interviews. So your personal statement is your opportunity, in addition to your LSAT scores and your GPA and your transcripts, to communicate who you are. So make it personal. Make it personal. Some schools will give you certain prompts around which you should organize your personal statement. Some will not. So make sure you follow the instructions if there are any given. But make sure that no matter what, a sense of who you are and why do you go to law school and what makes you special comes through in your personal statement. All right, next, let's talk about LSAT scores. Everybody wants to know, Professor Glumac, what's a good score? Well, first and foremost, does your LSAT score matter? Yeah, it does, absolutely. In fact, some people say it's critical and even weighted more heavily than the GPA. That depends on school by school sort of application process and application panels, but absolutely it matters. And the better law schools like Harvard and Yale and Stanford and Berkeley, they demand higher scores. There's no getting around that. So what is a good score? Well, I'm going to give you a very lawyerly answer, and I'm going to say the answer depends on the law school to which you're applying. It ranges anywhere from, 145 to 170 and over. Ivy League schools, for example, are going to require a score of 170 or higher. So how do you determine where you might be able to go to school? A few slides back, I mentioned using the ABA, the LSAC ABA approved, law schools algorithm to help you figure it out. like I said, we'll provide you with a link. You can go there, you can plug in your scores and see where you're eligible to apply. You can even do that before you go and take your LSAT, just to say, okay, if I score this on my LSAT, then I might be eligible for these schools. But know that really good schools like Ivy League schools and really high level schools like Berkeley and Stanford here in our Bay Area, they require a score of, high 160s, if not at least 170 or higher. A perfect score is 180, and scores range between 120 and 180. All right. So, know what you're shooting for when you're shooting for it. All right. Now, should you retake the LSAT if you don't do as well as you had hoped? Yes, you can, and you can take it, I believe, up to 3 times in a single calendar year, but be aware and beware, because some schools will only look at your highest score, but that's not true of every school. You can maybe call the school and find out, but you must understand, some schools will only take your highest score, but other schools will consider all your scores. Some of them might take an average. But be aware and beware that if you take the LSAT again, it could be viewed in multiple different ways. Okay, it could only take the highest. Some schools average them, some look at all your scores. So if you feel like you didn't do as well as you wanted to and you want to take it again, understand that it might be calculated in different ways by different schools. All right. All right. So let's come to the big question that everybody has. And this is oftentimes where a lot of students find themselves thinking to themselves, oh boy, what am I getting myself into? But I would rather you hear it from me honestly, so that you know how to strategize so that you can realize your dream if it is in fact your dream. So let's talk about the cost of law school. The average cost of private law school for tuition and fees is $43,000 per year. And that does not include living expenses. So you have to add that in on top of it. The average cost of public in-state law school for tuition and fees only is $26,000 a year. That does not include living expenses. And the average cost of public out-of-state law schools, like if you wanted to go to school in Michigan at a public law school, would be almost $40,000 per year. None of these figures include living expenses, so you have to calculate into that, well, what would be my rent and my groceries and my utilities and my telephone, all those things. So in addition to these annual costs for private, public in-state, and public out-of-state, you must calculate the living expenses of the area in which you're going to have to live to attend this particular law school. The top 10 programs in the country, places like Harvard, places like Stanford, places even like Berkeley, come close to almost $60,000 a year, plus living expenses, whatever those are going to be for wherever it is that you're going to school. So I want you all to go into this with your eyes wide open. And, there are a good portion of students who believe that the cost of their law school education was worth it, and some that say that it wasn't. I'm one of those people that think it was. And I always joke, why do I have that hanging behind me on the wall? Because that's a very expensive piece of art. I used to have it hanging in my living room, and people used to give me a hard time about it. And I said, well, because it's a very expensive piece of art. It's cost me $200,000, that diploma. But I did it. And I was a penniless undergraduate student. I worked part-time. I went to school part-time. I remember rolling change sometimes just to make sure that I had enough money to buy groceries. But I was able to do it with no help from anyone. I have law school loans, absolutely. But I thought it was worth it. So just know what you're getting yourself into so you can make an informed decision, okay? Now, what's law school really like? This is where I really want to give you some real honest feedback and honest guidance, because I think this is where students don't always know what they're getting themselves into. Once you get the application process, over with, and you start hearing back and you get admitted, what's it like once you get there? Here's the truth. Law school is hard. It's hard. It requires time. 3 years of your life where you're eating, thinking, drinking, sleeping, dreaming about the law. Okay? When you're in it, when you're in class, and when you're not in it. Okay, so 3 years of your life. So it requires a commitment of time over a 3-year period and on a weekly and daily basis as well. It requires commitment, which means agreeing or pledging to do something in the future, which is to see yourself through to the end, which means committing to your studies on a daily and weekly basis and on a semester by semester and year by year basis and getting through it. It also requires discipline and dedication. I always say to my students, there's no crying in law school. Managing your studies, reading hundreds of pages every night, being prepared for class by briefing every case, requires a certain level of preparedness and discipline and dedication, unlike anything you've experienced in your undergraduate career. It is demanding. It's demanding. And so it requires that you have a certain level of discipline and dedication if you would like to get through law school successfully. It also demands and requires rigor. Rigor is the quality of being extremely thorough, exhaustive, or accurate. That's the definition of rigor. Law school, like I said, is unforgiving. There is no crying in law school. And so is the law, which is one of the reasons why we train you to acclimate to this less than forgiving type of approach, is because the practice of law is not forgiving. If you blow a deadline or blow a statute, or you do something that falls below the standard of care for your clients, the law is rigorous. And so law school starts training you towards that. Being unprepared when called on in law school is not acceptable. There's no excuses. These half-ass attempts that might get you through undergrad, they don't fly in law school. And believe me, law school instructors will not pull any punches, and you will have your share of moments in some of these classes where you realize, God, I really need to make sure I'm prepared. I don't want that to happen to me if you see it happening to a classmate. But these sort of half measures and half-assed attempts don't cut it in law school. It's not for the faint of heart, so you need to be prepared. Now, law school, at the end of the day, isn't for everybody. And what I mean by that is not that you can't get in if you really want to, but you may not want to stay once you're there. It's not for everyone. It's simply not your cup of tea. It might have sounded or it might have seemed like a great idea in theory, but once you're there, you might realize, gosh, this simply isn't for me. Great in theory, but not in reality. And you know what? That's okay. That's okay. Better to realize it sooner than later, right? So that's what law school is really like from somebody who's been through it and who has seen many students through it and who has taught many students in law school. So there's questions you should ask yourself. And here's 6 of the most important ones. Why do you want to go to law school? What do you envision doing with your degree? Do some research and find out what's the job market like. Can you get into a well-ranked law school? Because that's going to mean, will you be able to get a great job afterwards? What's the cost-benefit analysis? If I invest this amount of money in my education, what's the job market like? How long will it take me to repay those loans? Is it worth it? Not only to my pocketbook, to my psychological well-being, and to my soul. Honestly, cost-benefit analysis can go beyond just the financial implications of committing to law school. Another question is whether or not you should take some time off first. Should you take a break from school altogether and work for a year or for a few semesters? Should you go and pursue a master's degree before you go on to law school? Maybe. Ask yourself these questions. Only you can answer it. Only you can determine whether or not you're ready to go to law school right away, or if you should take some time off to give it some more thought and explore some options. Now, what can you do to prepare now? How can you get a sense of what it might be like? First and foremost, become the best writer you can be. Come and take legal research and writing with me, because I'll tell you something, I designed it exactly the way I taught my law school students, and you'll get a great idea of what it's like to have to write for the law. You'll have to take the same course in your first year of law school, but whether you take that class with me or you take a writing class with another instructor, Become the best writer you can be, because the best lawyers are also great writers. All right. Try taking some law-based courses in the criminal justice program, like legal writing and research, which is CJ 335, or criminal law or criminal procedure, something that gives you an exposure to case-based learning and the Socratic method and working with cases and the specific areas of the law. It'll give you a taste. Take some other law-based courses like Poli-Sci 478 or constitutional law, Poli-Sci 552. Take courses in other departments, like in history or in philosophy, like the philosophy of law. All of these things will prepare you well. Try also to get some experience with the law. Try to take, like, a moot court class, or do a judicial externship, or work for the DA's office. Do something, where you expose yourself through outside opportunities. But most importantly, the one thing you can do is meet with a pre-law advisor as soon as possible, so that you can start exploring which of these avenues you can start, to accumulate some experience with. All right. So these are some of the things you can do to prepare yourself in advance. Take some law-based courses in criminal justice or in other departments. Get a sense, get a taste, get a sense of what it feels like. Because you know what? You may not like it, but better to know that now. And then on the other hand, like me, it might be love at first sight. All right, a few takeaways. The truth is that law school is hard to get into, and it's hard to get through once you're there. We've talked about that in the past few slides. It can also be very expensive and demanding, but if you are passionate about the law, as I am, and as many people are, and I hope you are, it can be incredibly rewarding. It was one of the best experiences in my entire life, and as hard and expensive and demanding as it was, I would not trade it for anything. I would do it all over again. So if you are passionate about the law, then it can be extraordinarily rewarding. So above all of the other advice that I've given you, make sure, though, that you want to go to law school. So those are a few last takeaways. And one last thing, because I'm a lawyer, I will always give a disclaimer. That's what lawyers do. It's the fine print. This workshop is intended to be informational only. The advice that I've put in this workshop was intended to be fairly comprehensive, but it does not replace meeting with a pre-law advisor. So come see Professor Snipes, make an appointment with Professor Jeff Snipes, or with me, so we can talk about this in great detail. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. Look for this video to be posted along with the slides, or excuse me, not the slides, but with the links should follow and be associated with this video. If you have any questions, you can email me as well. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop my share right now, and thank you all for joining me. Bye.